Okay, with this introduction, we were asked to be provocative, so I'm afraid I'm going to try to get a little bit provocative. Maybe not provocative, just weird. Usual sort of thing. There's an introduction. It's going to be interactive, I warn you, so stay awake. There may even be some singing, who knows. But here we go. So, introduction, a general synopsis of barriers to and benefits of MSFD and GES or GES. Is there a comparison to be made with the shipping forecast? So I guess I should start with a kind of quick show of hands. Does anybody know what I mean about the shipping forecast? Yes, some, quite a lot. Those who know what the shipping forecast is, how many of you actually listen to it or use it, you know, more than once a month? Okay, so you know, the whole premise of this talk has now disappeared. That's okay. Yeah, I think it's still worth pursuing. So, if we go to the next, I have a thing. So, in devotes, we had a whole work package devoted to the socio-economic importance of marine biodiversity and its engagement with the MSFD. We produced 2 deliverables. And I think the key thing with this work package was this was a group of natural scientists, biologists, ecologists, and also social scientists, economists and social scientists, who are actually interested in engaging with each other and talking with each other and building their research on each other. And that's kind of how we've come out with these 2 deliverables. People who actually think that this interdisciplinarity is kind of important to take the science forward. And we've looked at the legislation and we've looked at some of the costings that we can. We were quite a small group, so a limited amount of work was feasible. There was going to be a change in the presentations, but there's not now. So here's the playlist. And we're going to start with a couple of papers about legislation. So within devotes, we looked at the legislation. Does it work? How does it work? And how does it work in policy? And how well has it been implemented? And then we're going to think about all of this monitoring. So there's a lot of work in devotes about monitoring. So is it cost effective? How do we decide if it's cost effective to actually do the monitoring? How do we justify this? And Ricardo just sort of said that, you know, one of the big barriers for implementation is that countries aren't prepared to spend the money to implement the MSFD. So another area that we've also looked at is how do we look at how much it costs to implement management measures to get to good environmental status. And it's partly a legislative driver and partly an interest driver here. So we're going to explore some of those topics as well in this session. So the first part was looking at the legislation and, you know, God bless people like Ricardo and the whole of the European Parliament that they have to go through these long papers, and so did some of our devotes people. We actually all kind of ploughed through the legislation and the mechanics of how it works and how it's been implemented across Europe. And Sue Boyce is going to talk about some of that. But it's much easier to look at MSFD, you know, when you start thinking about fish and using words rather than going through that quite dense paperwork. And then, of course, there's quite a lot of effort that's gone on about what's the monetary value, is money important, how much is it going to cost? Can we afford to do it? And how do we help governments, member states, to actually think about how much it costs to actually implement MSFD? So you're going to see quite a couple of papers, 2 or 3 papers on that. But when we think about the money, do we always think about the money? So I have a really clapped out old boat and I sail in it a lot, and this is in the Isles of Scilly, which is one of the most beautiful places in the European Union as far as I'm concerned. And you know, when I'm on my boat or sailing, you know, I'm not sure quite what I think about. I'm going to ask the audience, is there anybody in the audience who maybe has a clue of what they think I'm thinking when I'm sitting on my boat? So, any questions from the audience about what I think about on the boat? Yes?
It's not about the money, money, money. We don't need your money, money, money. It's all about the world, yes. Just want to make the world dance.
Okay.
It's not about the money, 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 money. We don't need your money, money,
me, and I've told a lot of people this, for me the best day sailing was when I saw loads and loads of dolphins in a place that I don't expect to see dolphins. I can't put a value on that. But when we do go sailing, we're looking ahead. We're always thinking what's coming up next, what's going to happen. And arguably, maybe Marine Strategy Framework Directive is also about looking ahead, what's happening, how can we get to a better place. And in a long time ago, and I'm really glad that Ricardo also used sort of historical pictures, because I'm looking back as well as looking forward, there was a very bad shipwreck, and 450 people lost their lives in northern Wales. And as a consequence of that, Robert Fitzroy, who went out on the Beagle and was collecting lots and lots of measurements, just like marine scientists do, and these were meteorological measurements using quite old-fashioned techniques. Obviously now we have satellites as well. He managed to persuade people to set up a shipping forecast. I've got it in different things, I'm not going to pronounce all the names. But I actually looked around, and shipping forecast is something that is actually quite common across Europe. And it's kind of particularly important to any of us who do things at the coast or at the sea, or live at the sea, or by the sea. And it's quite iconic, and it's really important, certainly in the UK, and I think also elsewhere when I've talked to some colleagues. And it's in a standard format, just like the MSFD. There's an assessment of where we are now, what's coming up ahead, what the state is at the moment, how soon, or whatever. And if you're like me, you look at that and you think it's poetic. Probably the rest of you don't. I do. So the first one was broadcast in 1861. It was broadcast on the BBC in 1924. And the Finnish version, the Marissa, I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, sorry, was broadcast in 1926. And when they broadcast that, and when they started doing that, how many lives did they know were going to be saved? How much cargo would be saved? What was its value? What recreational sports would be enabled? What health and well-being benefits would we get from that recreational activity? The canoeing, kayaking, the diving, everything. How much scientific information would be gathered by setting up this forecast? How iconic a cultural service would it be? So at midnight in the UK, still, we have a broadcast on the radio, and it has this music called Sailing By, which is really corny. And then they have this very kind of melodic shipping forecast. And there are still quite a few hundreds, maybe thousands of people who can't get to sleep unless they've heard that. You know, I mean, it's a completely different version of the service. But in those days, did they know any of that? No, they just went ahead with it. So, you know, maybe we should think about that in terms of the MSFD. How will it change in the future? What will we look back and say, yes, this was important? I mean, even, you know, maybe in 5, 10, will they be looking at years' time, will they be looking at the stock market and say, ah, yes, Southern Europe, good environmental status, tourism will go up, stocks on tourism will go up, let's change our stocks and shares for tourism for the future. But it's looking a bit bad maybe in Northern Europe, so we'll devalue that. You know, markets might change in the future on the basis of the projections that we can put forward for the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, our assessments. You know, maybe that'll happen, who knows? But that's the future, and we have to think about the future. So where are we now with MSFD and its implementation? Well, are we on a half empty or a half full? Is it definitely empty, or is it definitely full, or whatever? Where do we want to be? Do we want to have it half full, or do we want to have it full? Where don't we want to be? We don't want it empty, for sure. This obviously bears back on last night's lovely meal. What's holding us back? Hopefully we'll hear some of this next session. And hopefully in this next session, from some of the talks, we'll start to think about what helps us to go forward. And I think Devote's the whole project has been about trying to think of helping to take MSFD forward to the future that we want, and how to get there, regardless of what happens in politics, maybe, or maybe helping to support politics rather than regardless. But we have to have that aspiration. We have to think about how do we get there, I think. So hopefully some of these talks will inspire us to go forward rather than looking back and being worried. Thank you.